And we've got a lot to get to in the next hour of the ReidOut, including the latest on the purge, the twisted, almost Soviet-style effort by unelected President Elon Musk to erase all vestiges of experience, intelligence, and institutional memory from the federal government, including, as we learned late today, firing every prosecutor who worked on the crimes committed by Trump and his supporters on January 6th. We're going to get to all of that in just a bit. But we begin tonight with families, friends, and fellow Americans mourning the 67 people killed in a mid-air chopper plane collision Wednesday night over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. It is the nation's first major commercial air crash since 2009. Many were flying home from the U.S. Figure Skating National Development Camp, which was held after last week's national championships in Wichita, Kansas. Some had eyes set on the Olympics. Two were part of a renowned former Russian Olympic figure skating duo who went on to coach young skaters in Boston. These were promising young competitive skaters, some of whom were traveling with their parents, like Jenna Hahn, just 13 years old, shown here during one of her competitions. Her mother, Jin, has also died. Among the lost are flight attendant Denasia Elder, a mother of two whose job as a flight attendant was one of her dreams. This fatal flight was supposed to be her last before changing careers within the airline. Kaya Duggins, who was set to start her dream job as a law professor at Howard University next fall, also died in the crash. In a post, Howard University described Duggins as a civil rights lawyer who dedicated her career to fighting against unconstitutional policing and unjust money bail practices. 3 soldiers aboard the Black Hawk helicopter that collided with the American Airlines jet are presumed dead. Today, the Army released the names of 2 of them. At the family's request, the 3rd soldier's name has not been released. The 2 names released today were Andrew Eves on the left and Ryan O'Hara. Ryan's father, Gary O'Hara, had this to say about Trump's ugly, bigoted remarks blaming diversity, equity, and inclusion for the crash.
If the other pilot was a woman, to me, I can't imagine being the parents of that other pilot if she was a girl, saying that, because she's a woman, she was less capable than the man. I can't imagine the horror that those parents must be going through.
What may be even scarier to learn is that while this was the first major collision in over a decade, there have been a lot of close calls. Just 24 hours before this horrific event, another plane that was coming in for a landing at DCA had to make a second approach because a military helicopter had appeared near its flight path. Thankfully, that plane landed safely. Last year, DCA saw at least 8 near-miss incidents, according to the FAA. We cannot forget that this airport is home to the busiest runway in the country. As The Guardian points out, alarm bells were raised about how congested the sky is over Washington well before this week's crash. It just went unheard. Even worse is that somehow, last year, Congress approved adding 10 more commercial flights into that airport as part of the FAA reauthorization bill. It was passed 88-4, with the 4 Democratic senators from Maryland and Virginia, the states surrounding the airport, voting against it. They warned that something like this could happen.
But more and more planes on this busiest runway in the United States is just going to increase the chance of a significant incident. Who cares about the airlines? We ought to care about safety. We ought to care about passengers. The last thing we want is for there to be something bad happen out at that airport and people stick a mic in our face and say, hey, you knew all this and you were warned, but you voted for it anyway?
Wow. Well, of course, it was hard to compete with the decades-long lobbying efforts by groups backed by the airlines like this one.
Congress can help lower prices for consumers by allowing more flights. Experts agree DCA has the capacity to handle more flights. More flights mean more affordable access for all. The old rules drive up prices and stifle competition. Air travelers deserve better.
The airline industry's arguments for more deregulation haven't changed since they started in 1978, when Congress passed a law giving the airline industry more freedoms, allowing airlines to decide their own routes. The airlines argued that by doing so, it allowed them to get ticket prices down. They succeeded. But as a result, not only did they rapidly expand the number of routes, but numerous new airlines also emerged, further crowding the skies. According to the FAA, during peak travel times, there are approximately 5,400 airplanes in the air across the United States at the same time. And the push for more deregulations have continued ever since. Trump has, of course, jumped on the bandwagon. After being in office for less than 2 weeks, he has gutted the infrastructure of the FAA that was supposed to keep us safe. And joining me now is the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser. Mayor Bowser, thank you so much for being here. This is the nightmare that Tim Kaine, that Tim Kaine really literally prophesied and these senators worried about. Has there been any communication between the Congress and you, who, this is D.C.'s airport, about the crowded skies? Anyone who lives in the DMV can see how crowded they are.
Well, absolutely. And I have, during that reauthorization process, worked with the delegation. Of course, our delegation has 4 senators instead of 6 senators because we don't have any in Washington, D.C. But I have worked with the delegation on our concerns, and our Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton has as well. I am very pleased that the delegation has asked the Department of Defense to halt the helicopter traffic and put a pause on that while this matter is investigated. But you point to, in a very comprehensive way, Joy, what the stakes are and the look that we have to see, whether it's during the FAA reauthorization or in another process, how the traffic or additional traffic is determined at Reagan National.
I mean, you pointed out that D.C. does not have a senator, which emphasizes the way in which our capital is essentially treated as a colony, with its fate in the hands of Congress. And so when you think about that, and the billionaires who have funded to make sure that D.C. cannot be a state, it does sort of point to the powers that could have been, right, to determine D.C.'s own fate. Please feel free to comment on that, or if you like, on President Donald Trump quipping that he would not visit the site of this horror because, quote unquote, do you want me to take a swim, which is what he said yesterday.
Well, let me say this. I did visit the site as close as I could get to it at Bolling Air Force Base, or Joint Base Bolling, the night that it happened, where our fire and EMS, police department, and agencies from around our region were responding to frigid temperatures and a dark night, trying to rescue people and recover people. And they're going to stay out there for as long as it takes. And as far as our work with our Congresswoman and our federal delegation, we're going to keep fighting to make sure that the interest of Washingtonians who are flying, our visitors, our business people, our members of Congress, and everybody who visits Washington, D.C. is safe. And so I think that there are some other, Washington, D.C. is unique, and there's some peculiarities, especially as it relates to how slots are added at Reagan National Airport. And that warrants a deep, deep discussion. And I hope that, and I'm counting on our regional delegation to push that point even before the next reauthorization bill.
Let me ask you, I'm just going to show this. I want to show this because, we broadcast from the DMV here. And this is just a map showing DCA and all the air traffic that's just in real time over the evening. And I think you have to actually be here to understand how you really cannot not see planes in the air anywhere in Maryland, Virginia, or the district. It's just so crowded. Have you had that conversation with Delegate Holmes Norton or with the senators, that law that was passed, which every non-D.C. resident, people from Texas and Oklahoma and all over the country, voted to make that traffic worse? Have you had a conversation about maybe that law being revisited?
Absolutely, and we intend to have it more. Already, I have been in contact with the senators. We started that conversation in our briefing at the airport, but it is going to take more than us. I had an opportunity also to chat with the senators from Kansas, where this flight originated, and we are all going to have to hold lawmakers accountable for making the right decisions for the flying public, not just to have more convenient flights. Obviously, we want as many direct flights to Washington, D.C. As possible and as is safe, but we have to take a step back and make sure that anything that's being added is being added with the input of flying in aviation experts, in that they are informing the lawmaking process.
Well, I will just say, and I'll put this on me, not you, D.C. should be a state. There are more people living in D.C. than I believe in Wyoming, and I think it deserves to have full representation.
2 states.
We appreciate
more than in 2 states.
Certainly. More than in 2, and there you have it. Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And let's bring in Randy Babbitt, a former commercial airline pilot who served as administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration under President Obama. And as I introduce you, sir, I want to note that we have breaking news about what appears to be a small plane crash in Philadelphia. So we're looking to get more information about that. We do not have a lot of information. We will bring that to the audience as we get it. But I want to go to you, Mr. Babbitt. You just heard, and I showed that, if we can put it back up again, the air traffic just at DCA, just as of today. And it looks like the most terrifying traffic jam in the world. And I wonder for you, if you feel comfortable with the public's safety, with it, we know there's a plane down today in Philadelphia, being in the hands of people who are being purged and those who remain in place, their main qualification is loyalty to Donald Trump. Not what they know about aviation or aviation safety or their concern about aviation safety, but whittling down the government, including the FAA, to people whose main qualification is that they're not Black, women, gay, or disabled, and that they love Donald Trump. Is that good enough?
Well, I certainly oppose any of that thinking. We've had a long history of putting the best and the most qualified people into our positions all throughout the FAA, whether you're looking at the design of new aircraft, whether you're continuing to follow up older aircraft, our air traffic controllers. Everything about it is staffed with very qualified people. And to think that you should bring in people simply for their political backgrounds and replace people with lifelong skills flies in the face of looking for a safer air traffic control system and a safer sky operation.
Let me give you some Bureau of Labor Statistics projections. We're thankful that as of now we still get this data. The Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that about 18,000 pilot jobs are opening up each year through 2033. Meanwhile, the FAA has had a shortage of air traffic controllers for years. Some have said that eliminating DEI, which is simply trying to recruit people and say, hey, we have a much more diverse country, maybe people of color, maybe disabled vets, maybe people who wouldn't normally think of it, should consider being pilots. I have a family member that did that. If you say we're not going to recruit that way anymore and we are only going to politically recruit, does that help that shortage? And does that shortage make us safer?
No, it doesn't help the shortage at all. I would say it actually adds to the problem. Really and truly, we want to hire very qualified people, and it really doesn't make any difference whether you're Black or red or it doesn't matter. We want qualified pilots, we want qualified controllers, and we train them well. And I think if you wanted to look at something to move training forward and produce more pilots, we ought to take a look at actually shifting more focus to real training as opposed to the accumulation of simple flight time, which we shifted to a few years ago, and I think that adds to the problem today.
We know that the tower was short-staffed at the time of this tragic crash. We also know that there's tremendous stress being placed on every single federal employee right now. with purges, with people being fired. All of us who work in this business are getting emails and texts from people who are terrified about losing their jobs. Does that kind of stress, and then having the head of the FAA run out of town by Elon Musk, and people knowing that's happening, I can't imagine that doesn't make us less safe. What do you think?
Oh, I have increasing concerns on that very issue. You know, we're getting rid of a lot of people, a lot of history, and my experience at the FAA, and I came from the private sector. That was my first federal position, and I was astounded at the quality of the people I was allowed to work with, the people that ran the departments. I was very impressed with the quality of all of the operation. And to simply say someone has been there for 30 years and we don't like who they voted for, and therefore they have to leave, a qualified person, that makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Yeah, I think you are in the majority, sir. Randy Babbitt, thank you so much for your time. Coming up, Elon Musk's grip on power keeps tightening. New reporting out tonight looking into how and why his aides are locking career civil servants out of crucial data systems. That's next. Now, I want to know for our audience that we are working on getting more information on this small, well, we don't know what size plane that has crashed in the Philadelphia area. We are working on trying to get that breaking news to you. We will do that as we get that information. But I want to pivot right now to the very dark and dangerous phase of the second Trump administration that we have all entered into. We are now undergoing an American equivalent to the Stalin-era Great Purge at the direction of Elon Musk, an unelected billionaire who bought himself a president. Earlier this week, we learned that the Office of Personnel Management, the government's HR department, sent a letter to all federal employees offering them a legally dubious inducement to resign. According to the Washington Post, Musk has embedded himself, or has embedded at least 3 longtime surrogates in that office, which is key if you're looking to destroy federal agencies. Today, Reuters reported that Musk and his associates at OPM tightened their personal grip over the office by blocking career civil servants from accessing computer systems that contain personal data of millions of federal employees, which they need to do their jobs. This highly sensitive material is now under the control of people who answer to Musk alone. He has also burrowed associates over at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, who, along with others who have existing relationships with Kash Patel, seem to be running things until Patel is confirmed as FBI director. Today, in a purge unlike anything seen in modern FBI history, the Trump administration has forced out all 6 of the FBI's most senior executives and multiple heads of various FBI field offices across the country. And late this afternoon, the U.S. Department of Justice fired every probationary prosecutor who worked on January 6th cases and informed employees that they would continue their investigation of those who investigated the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Let that sink in for a moment. The Trump administration freed the people who assaulted our Capitol, tried to upend a free and fair election, and beat up police officers, and are now punishing those who upheld the rule of law. It is a dark day in America, indeed. And joining me now is Sherrilyn Ifill, Endowed Chair of Civil Rights at Howard University and former President and Director Counsel of the Legal Defense Fund. Sherrilyn, there's so much to unpack. I almost don't know where to begin, but I want to start with the legality, if any exists, of an outside person who does not work for the federal government, having his team lock civil servants out of their computers and get access to the personal information of government workers.
Hi, Joy. There is so much to talk about, and you're asking the right question, and you should know that lawyers are poring over that very question. Not so much is it illegal, but what are the means by which its legality can be challenged? It is shocking, and I think we all have to give ourselves a little bit of a pause. None of us have ever faced anything like this before. We have never faced a private citizen, one private citizen, coming in and purporting to take over agencies of the United States government, giving free access to government information and given the power, at least believing that he has the power, to fire people across the government. So this is shocking. It is in some ways beyond what we thought of Trump. He now has someone who has his own idiosyncrasies and issues and ego working side by side. And I think that people are overloaded with trying to confront Trump's own actions and then also trying to address the actions of Elon Musk, who's having a huge footprint in this administration.
Right, and it seems in some sense that Donald Trump has leased the presidency to Elon Musk and is allowing him to act in his stead, to essentially act as his own form of president. But that's not even acting like a president because, you know, funds are allocated by Congress, not the president. So even if Trump were doing it, it would be outside the boundaries of what we understand as the Constitution. But I just want to go through some of this. This idea that Donald Trump or the executive branch can offer people an inducement to leave their jobs, which every single federal employee got it. Mm-hmm. There is no statutorial basis for saying that the executive branch can offer people a severance package, right? Like, that's not possible.
Well, so this is the thing, Joy. You hit the nail on the head, and early in the lead up, you talked about, you know, Elon Musk buying himself a president. If we are not in short order able to move quickly, he will have bought himself a country. The people that we should be focusing our attention on are the people who are actually authorized to create government agencies. And that's the United States Congress, right? They are the ones who create agencies by statute. I've been hearing rumors about, you know, the president wishing to close the Department of Education. The Department of Education was created by Congress pursuant to a statute in 1979, like the Department of Veterans Affairs was created by statute in 1987 by Congress, like the Department of Homeland Security was created in 2006. And if President Biden said he wanted to shut down the Department of Homeland Security, or worse, if he had a billionaire friend come in and begin to decimate and dismantle the Department of Veterans Affairs or the Department of Homeland Security, everyone would know it was illegal. And Congress, the organization, the body that creates those institutions, would be up in arms. And I think the reason why this feels so strange, the reason why it's so quiet, is because we are dealing with a majority in the Congress of Republicans who have decided to turn over their power, their authority, their obligation to engage in checks and balances, the full level of their authorization over agencies. They have decided to turn that over to Trump to do whatever he will, and Trump has decided to turn that over to Musk. So we are dealing with two levels of congressional abdication of their power. And so as much as we talk about Trump and like to talk about Trump, we've got to start talking very seriously about Mike Johnson, about Republicans who have abdicated. They are the elected representatives. Nobody elected Elon. He's just a guy who has been allowed to insert himself in our government and is creating lots of damage. But he cannot do it without the cover of the elected officials who should be representing us and should be stopping him. And what I have not heard is enough of an appeal and a push. I know people talk about the Democrats all the time, but it's the Republicans who have the majority in both the House and the Senate. And they are allowing this executive to snatch from a separate and independent branch of our government their power by allowing Elon to take over these agencies and to engage in the kinds of activity that is not even authorized by law, but that is protected by congressional statute.
Right. And I think this is such an important point, that it feels in a sense like this standing down by the majority in Congress is because Musk is accomplishing from an extra legal or an extra governmental position what they could not pass in Congress, right? If you passed rules saying that you were going to sort of strip the government and hand out gimme contracts to Elon Musk, to whoever, I mean, he essentially, if you want to strip food stamps and Meals on Wheels and end Head Start, that would not pass Congress. It seems that they're saying, Elon Musk, Joy, you run the government and strip the government bare.
Yeah. Joy, I think it's actually flipped. I actually don't think that the members of Congress precisely appreciate it being done this way. First of all, they are not getting the advantages of the grift. These are Elon's friends and the Harvard senior and the various interns from his businesses who are in there doing this work. So they're not getting the advantage for their friends and family of the grift. And the way it's being done is drawing attention in a negative way to them because their constituents do use SNAP and their constituents do care about their veterans benefits and their constituents do care about Medicare. So they don't actually like it being done this way. The problem is that Trump decided it should be done this way. And the Republicans in Congress are so supine, so frightened of first Trump, but also now frightened of Elon, who has promised to primary anybody who doesn't toe the line. They are so desperate for these jobs that some of them have only had for a few years, so desperate for these jobs in this city that they say is the swamp, that they are willing to lay down and allow it to happen this way. And we saw this with the freeze. It happened in a way that even they didn't like. We didn't hear them talking, but trust me, they were getting the calls to their office too, the Republican members of Congress. They were concerned that their constituents were getting angry and scared about Medicaid and about Medicare and about veterans benefits and about SNAP. So I don't think that this is their ideal of how they would want this to happen. I agree with you that they want to cut those programs, but not quite this way so that it gives them this blowback. But they have decided to give in, and so they have no control.
Yeah. And left it to the governors to try to fight for the constituents that they also serve. Sherilyn Ifill, thank you so much, my friend. I appreciate you. Thank you very much. I want to give you all an update now on the small plane crash in Philadelphia. Let's bring in Tom Costello, NBC News senior correspondent covering aviation. Tom, what do we know about this crash?
Joy, we have a major story developing. Unfortunately, it is yet another plane crash happening at this hour. It is in North Philadelphia, not far from the Roosevelt Mall. The FAA just releasing a status update. A Learjet 55, says the FAA, crashed around 6:30 p.m. local time on Friday. After departing Northeast Philadelphia Airport, there were 2 people on board. The plane was en route to Springfield Branson National Airport. The FAA and NTSB will investigate. Our affiliate in Philadelphia is reporting that this was a medevac plane of some sort. Again, the FAA saying it was a Learjet. It went down, and apparently, according to our affiliate, there are reports of multiple houses that may have been hit in this crash. The Philly PD, Philly Fire Department, all responding as you would expect, and the governor is saying that he has spoken as well with the mayor, and the team is coordinating for all state resources to head that way. The latest information that we're getting is, that is the bottom line, with some reports of injuries and a massive emergency response. I am at Reagan National Airport, Joy, because we have since Wednesday night been covering this midair crash between an Army Black Hawk helicopter and the regional jet. 67 people dead after both went into the Potomac River, and the recovery efforts are still underway, with the NTSB announcing late today they've recovered all of the black boxes. They're still working to recover more of the victims, and it may take literally lifting the fuselage up and out of the water, out of the Potomac, before they're able to recover all of the victims. So now we have yet another serious aviation incident happening in just 3 days. And this one, again, is in North Philadelphia, a private plane, reportedly a medevac plane of some sort. The FAA saying it's a Learjet 50, and all resources in North Philly are, as you would expect, being diverted. This is not far from the Roosevelt Mall, for those of you who know exactly where this is in North Philly. Not far, we're told, from Roosevelt, and I want to double-check the cross street. Conton, is that right? Contoman Street. So, Joy, this is really breaking as we speak, and as you see, a horrific ball of fire coming from the ground there. This is not a small Cessna. This is a Learjet, and therefore with jet fuel on board, and potentially several people as well.
And we don't know, I'm assuming, Tom, the number of people that might have been on that jet. But just for people who sort of don't understand sort of jets versus jets, I mean, a Learjet would be smaller than bigger than a commuter plane, I'm guessing, but smaller than maybe the shuttles that people take, like the Delta shuttle. Like, what's the size of a Learjet?
No, a Learjet is quite literally, what CEOs or movie stars will have at their disposal. They'll either own it or they will rent it. But in this case, it is also flown by medevac agencies, hospitals, and organ transplant teams, that kind of thing. They will equip that Learjet to carry patients. And there is video from the scene on the ground, and you can see it is quite serious at this hour. Again, reports that it has slammed into several homes in the area and not far from the mall as well, the Roosevelt Mall, with just a massive response on the ground. Again, the second major aviation incident in just the last few days. The first one here at Reagan National Airport, which is still very much under investigation, and still all of the victims not out of the Potomac River here in Washington.
Tom Costello, thank you very much. If you get anything new, please just wave your hands and we will come back to you. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated. Let's bring in MSNBC's Ali Velshi on the phone. Ali, this is a nightmare that seems to be metastasizing in Philadelphia. You can see these balls of flames that we were just talking to Tom Costello about. This is near the Roosevelt Mall. So now we're talking about the potential for injuries on the ground, obviously injuries from that plane or fatalities in both circumstances. This seems like a bad time to have utter chaos in the federal government and at the FAA.
Yeah, this is a really complicated matter because Northeast Philadelphia Airport falls under the Philadelphia Aerodrome. So the larger air traffic control area that controls that area is Philadelphia and the Philadelphia Tower. It's responsible for a lot of incoming and outgoing flights anywhere into the region. It's a pretty busy airport, actually. This flight was coming in from Morristown, New Jersey, as Tom was saying. These Learjets are equipped, because of the size of them and the range that they can fly, they're equipped to put medical patients on. They can put stretchers on them. Very unusual situation, because to fly a Learjet, your qualifications have to be pretty high. So we're not quite sure, and we never like to speculate this early into an accident as to what could have happened. But it does seem to have overshot the runway. And when you do that, you end up in, first of all, a pretty residential area in Northeast Philadelphia. So it's densely populated. You know, one of the good fortunes we always seen when a plane doesn't land exactly where it's supposed to be is that often it's in an unpopulated area. That's not the case here. This is a populated area. Roosevelt Mall is obviously a busy place. I'm looking at aerial shots right now, and there are closures all around the area because this is a big concern. It's also a very short journey on an aircraft that is very powerful, and because it's a jet, carries a great deal of fuel. Jet fuel is very flammable, so this has the potential to be much more serious than that looks at the moment. We do know, what we know right now is it does seem to have been on a medical mission coming from Morristown, New Jersey. Very short flight, not long at all, but that's often the case with these medevac flights or these things in which they're moving patients. But yeah, this has landed outside of a fairly busy airport. Northeast Philadelphia is the second busiest airport in the Philadelphia metro area, but they all fall. I've flown out of the Philadelphia regional airports a lot. They all fall under Philadelphia. So any air traffic control information you need, if you're flying out of any of these small airports, it gets governed by the ATC and the controllers that deal with Philadelphia Airport, because it's all in very similar related airspace, and it is incredibly busy airspace. Obviously, for those of us who live in New York, you have three major airports and a bunch of subsidiary airports, so there's probably no busier airport, but we've been talking about DCA with Reagan. There are three major airports in that area and a lot of subsidiary airports. This area around Philadelphia has a lot of them. So this is a busy airport area. It's a busy area for air flights, and it is sadly an area where if a plane does overshoot or something happens and it doesn't land on the pad of the airport, there's a great deal of danger of getting into an occupied area, where people live. One of the instructions pilots always have when they're having a problem landing or taking off, when you're that close to the ground, it's the most dangerous aspect of flight, both taking off and landing. And the instruction a pilot always has is you fly that plane until it's not flyable anymore, until it's onto the ground. But if you are taking off or landing in an area where you're running out of runway and there's nothing there, you aim that plane to the place where you are going to cause the least amount of damage. They say if there's houses, aim between houses. If there's trees, aim between trees. Try and get that plane to where it has to go so that when that fire comes up, it's the most important thing. And when a plane's going down, in your training, and if you're a Learjet pilot, you've got a lot of training. One of the things you learn is you turn everything off, including the fuel, because the biggest danger, you can land a plane sometimes successfully in a crash. The biggest danger is a fire. Once the plane has caught fire, you not only are in severe danger inside that plane, and all the passengers are in severe danger, but so is everybody around you. And unfortunately, this very preliminary reporting is that this is what has happened. Obviously, we're seeing images of it, so we know that this is what has happened. The thing that every pilot fears, and that is a fire on landing, on crashing, or any time during flight. That's the most serious and most difficult thing to get out of. So we don't know whether that crash was survivable when it landed, but that kind of fire makes it look very, very concerning.
Yeah, indeed. I'm just going to give some updated information I want to give to the viewers. There were 2 people on board that aircraft. It was en route to Springfield Branson National Airport in Missouri. That is according to the FAA. And just to continue on what you're saying, Allie, because what we're looking at here is not just the flames, but also the smoke. And I can only imagine how toxic that smoke is from jet fuel, especially since, as you said, this plane had just taken off. That means it was full of fuel. And so I'm wondering, you know, those houses look really, really close, and the danger to people there, not just from potential fire, but also from smoke.
Yeah, and the spread of fire, as we watched in Los Angeles, right? When you're in an urban area and homes are very, very close together, there's all these sort of fantasies about how you make sure that home fires don't spread to other places by having brush that's not too clear to your, close to your house and 100 feet and 200 feet. That's not how it works in a place like Northeast Philadelphia. These are heavily populated areas. Homes are very, very close together. So it's not a situation where if 1 or 2 houses are on fire, you're safe. This is going to be a full fire response in the area, because they're going to have to make sure that everything on every block in that area isn't there, and that embers from the fire don't end up on someone else's house and creating a much, much bigger problem. As I say, when you're thinking about a plane crash, it's a terrible, terrible thing, but you hope, and this is what all pilots do, they all try and say, if this plane is going down, how do I get it to go down with the minimal impact, both obviously to the people on board, but to the people on the ground, and that always has to do with fire. So there's only so much you can do. You can turn the fuel off in a plane, but once it crashes, very, very easy to ignite that fuel, and that plane would have been a plane with probably fully fueled. Small planes don't tend to fly around without full fuel if they can avoid doing so, because it's a safety mechanism. On large planes that are going across the country, they tend not to have more fuel than you need. But on a small plane, you have to have at least half an hour more fuel than you would need to complete the trip that you filed for. So it's possible that that plane was going to refuel somewhere along the line, but that's a lot of fuel that's already on the plane, and that's burning. And once that fuel gets onto things around it, there's very little firefighters can do except try and provide for the area around it to hope that fire doesn't spread.
Allie, please stay with me. I want to bring back in Randy Babbitt, former administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. He joins me on the phone. Mr. Babbitt, thank you for coming back. We appreciate you spending some more time with us. There are still bodies being recovered in the Potomac from the crash that took place between that airplane and chopper, that fatal crash. And now there is a second plane down within just a couple of days. What will the FAA be doing in the immediate aftermath? What is the job? Walk us through what the FAA would be doing regarding this plane that has gone down in Philly.
Well, first, yes, I'm spending my afternoon and evening with MSNBC, but and I know precious little, to be very candid. This accident was, just obviously very recent. But the FAA, the first thing they would do is try to get all the records, talk to the tower personnel. What was the weather conditions? They're certainly going to coordinate with the NTSB, who will, actually be charged with investigating the accident. But the FAA has accident investigators as well, and they'll try to ascertain as much data as they could. They'll certainly record the tracks. My understanding is this aircraft shot an approach, and it was a medevac airplane, if I understand correctly, and it overshot the runway.
It was.
There's a little bit of history. It's sort of a blessing and a curse. The medevacs, it's always an emergency condition. You have someone, you're either going to go get someone from an accident or you're taking someone from an accident. And they're obviously, because we're flying them in and out, they're not healthy. They've been injured. And so a lot of times these groups, the medevac pilots, sort of push the edge of the envelope to make sure they can get somebody to a hospital in sometimes marginal conditions, candidly. And I don't know what the weather up. I live close enough to know that it's raining here, so it was probably a wet runway. And they were trying to get on the ground to get some people some emergency help, and something went wrong.
Let me ask you this question, because in the previous crash, it was a military chopper that perhaps was flying a training exercise that rammed into a civilian aircraft. This now being a Learjet, as you said, a medevac plane flying a medevac mission. How do air traffic controllers prioritize who has the right of way in these incredibly crowded skies? You have all of these large jumbo jets and passenger planes attempting to traverse the country and doing regional and national flights and international flights. And then, as you said, you've got these smaller planes, choppers, other aircraft that are also in the air that may fly lower or higher, but they're competing for that airspace with these larger planes. How do air traffic controllers make the decision and coordinate all of this traffic? It seems that it would be incredibly difficult.
It is incredibly difficult. It's complicated, but the system is pretty tried and true. So basically, someone files a flight plan, and that goes in. So first come, first serve. You file a flight plan. They're going to lay your flight out. Someone else will file another one and say, well, I want that same altitude. Well, it's already taken, so you have to take another altitude. And, the process continues. For the most part, you pretty well get the routes and altitudes you would like, unless you're going into an incredibly busy airport environment. Having said that, priorities come about when someone says, let's start with a routine operation. Everybody is first come, first serve. But, you and I are in an airplane, and we burn more fuel than we planned on. I'm going to request a little priority. I'd like some out of operational necessity, and that will move me up a little bit. And of course, the most ultimate is to declare an emergency, which puts you in first place. If you say, hey, I'm having a big problem, I'm declaring an emergency, you're number one to land.
Sure. And obviously, Ali Velshi, who has lots of experience flying as well, has talked about the fact that what you don't do is obviously deliberately try to aim toward an urban environment. When that happens, it suggests something really catastrophic must have gone wrong with the plane, right? If it winds up landing, you can literally see apartment buildings behind those flames.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I don't want to speculate. There's a lot of information missing from my analysis. So all I know is literally what I've heard in the last 2 minutes, and I don't know whether the airplane had an engine failure. Maybe they landed long and tried to go around and lost an engine in the go around. I don't know, but a lot of things can complicate a landing, and you're right, no one would ever intentionally. You pick the path of least resistance and the least harm. If you're going to have to put the airplane down, you're going to fly it and pick out a path that will do the least amount of damage to you, the passengers, and where you're landing. So sometimes that means going into a lake instead of a housing development. But that's what they do.
Sure. Randy, please stay with me if you could. I want to bring in Jeff Gazzetti, MSNBC contributor and former NTSB investigator. Mr. Gazzetti, thank you so much for being with us. There's very little that we know, obviously, other than that it was a Learjet with 2 on board. It was on its way to Springfield Branson National Airport in Missouri. That is all we know. We know that it was doing some sort of medevac mission. What would be the start, other than, obviously, the immediate recovery, securing that area, making sure that people are evacuated and away from those flames and that toxic smoke? But when all of that is accomplished, what would be the next steps in trying to make sense of this and figure out what happened?
Hi, Joy. Well, from what I'm hearing, this was not a landing accident. This occurred right after takeoff from the northern Philadelphia airport, just a few minutes after takeoff. It got to somewhat of an altitude, and then it just it somehow lost. There was a loss of control, and it came screaming down and impacted some structures. You know, it's the Lear 55 is a business jet. It's got 2 jet engines. When you say medevac mission, that can mean a lot of things. They could have been transporting a patient. Patients are transported with fixed-wing aircraft, but not because they're really in distress, like you see a helicopter picking up an accident victim. It's usually a hospital transport to go from one hospital to another for a surgery or something like that. Medical transports could also be for just organs, for organ transport. This is what fixed-wing aircraft are typically used for. With regards to the accident, you can be sure that the local NTSB field office is going to send a couple of investigators, and they're going to sit back and let the first responders put out the fire, and they're going to have to wait for the scene is safe for them to go in there. This aircraft likely had a cockpit voice recorder, not a flight data recorder. And so they'll be looking for that. They're just going to have to see, they'll look at the recorded radar data, ADSB data, which is, records the track of the aircraft, and they'll be able to see how high it got and then how quickly it descended into the ground. And so they'll begin their investigation from there.
And we could see how quickly it descended into the ground, that terrifying image of it sort of barreling into the ground. You said that these types of planes have do not have a flight data recorder, which we tend to think of as the black box that gives us the answers as to what happened. So you're saying that these types of aircrafts don't have that kind of recorder. Could a flight recorder that doesn't have the data part of it give as many answers?
So it doesn't have a flight data recorder, but it does have a cockpit voice recorder. So you would be able to hear what the crew is saying inside the cockpit. But yeah, smaller planes like this don't have the wiring, and there is no regulation to indicate that it needs to have a flight data recorder with all the parameters showing what all the flight controls are doing second by second. But still, a cockpit voice recorder can yield a lot of information also. And hopefully this recorder was working, and it can survive the fire. Flight recorders don't survive sitting in smoldering temperatures for 2, 3, 4 days. So hopefully they'll be able to get that fire out and get that recorder, and that'll be very helpful.
Yeah. Let me go back to Ali Velshi. We've now had a tweet. This is the new world we live in, Ali, from Sean Duffy, the brand new Secretary of Transportation. Not the most experienced, obviously. His former job way back in the day was on The Real World Boston, and then he was a congressman, but this is not his expertise. However, he has now tweeted that there were 6 people on board that plane. Earlier, the FAA said there were 2 people on board. So that is somewhat contradictory information. It seems quite early to be giving definitive pieces of information. Does it surprise you that Sean Duffy has now given contradictory information to the FAA?
Yeah, a medevac flight's going to have a flight plan, first of all. The reason you file a flight plan is for accidents. I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is for accidents. So if your plane goes down, someone knows where to search for your plane if it goes down. So they should have proper information on this. That a Learjet operating as a medevac would never have fewer than 2 because that's the crew required to fly that plane. 2 would suggest that there was nobody other than the pilot and the co-pilot on the plane. 6 would suggest something else is happening. In other words, there are other people, including possibly a patient or medical personnel on that plane. So that's something to keep in mind. Number 2, takeoff and landing accidents are both the most dangerous stages of flight for the same reason, and that is you don't have altitude. If something goes wrong and you're at 10,000 feet or higher, you have options. You can look for places to land, and you can land that plane. When you're taking off, you're at a dangerous attitude. Your plane's at an angle that if you undertake certain maneuvers, you get yourself into danger. So it's the same problem you've got when you're landing and you're taking off. A good pilot is always looking for the place they're going to land if their engine gives out or there's some kind of problem. Your prior guest was talking about perhaps doing a go-around, coming back and trying to land again. There's a little complication with that at that particular airport at Philadelphia Northeast, which is about 60 miles from Philadelphia International Airport. Part of the problem is that one of the runways there, they're asphalt runways, so they're good runways. One of them is 7,000 feet. That would be no problem for a Learjet. One of them's 5,000 feet, 4,999. That's on the short end of what a Learjet can take. It's actually underneath. It's a little less than a Learjet needs. So if a Learjet needs to make a landing, they need to come back around and try and land that plane on a short runway. That means they got to touch down right at the front of the runway and hope that the plane stops. It's actually shorter than you need. Learjets are known for the fact that they can get into small airports with short runways. 5,000 feet is shorter than a Learjet needs to be able to run. So we're very early in the game, and it's wise not to speculate, but sure. It is, visibility is low in the Philadelphia area right now. It's only light rain. The winds are not high enough to have been a problem. The winds are very low right now in the Philadelphia area and at Philadelphia Northeast, but visibility was very, very low, which means if something went wrong and they had to make a decision based on what they could see out the cockpit, that's problematic because like Chicago Midway or a lot of other airways, this is a busy airport in a commercial and residential area. We like to think of airports in the old days as being far out from things where all the buildings built around it are built so that, there's no trouble. That's not necessarily what Philadelphia Northeast is. It's a busy airport around which houses and businesses have grown. So if you're in trouble trying to take off or land from that airport on a night where there's low visibility, your options could be limited.
Let me just ask a question that is just from the visual, just watching that horrific image of that plane descending rapidly onto the ground. And I just want to ask Randy and then Jeff if the attitude of what you're seeing the plane looks like, of it sort of barreling in this arc onto the ground. It didn't go down as if it, as you said, looked like it was attempting to land. It really went down in this really steep arc. Does that tell you anything, or is that just something that we see in horror, but it doesn't really tell us anything about what happened? And I'll start with you, Randy. Not sure if I have Randy. Let me ask Jeff the same question. Yeah. If that arc that you're seeing, I'm sorry, go ahead. Please go ahead, Randy.
No, if you would repeat, you guys are, I'm supposed to be on the show following this one, so I was trying to log in, but
I'm so sorry. No problems. We have held you beyond your limit of what you have agreed to, so we appreciate you.
Well,
I was just asking if just looking at the arc of the... Sure. If the arc of the way you see that plane going down, the steep arc that you see of that plane, the way it's hitting the ground, if that alone tells you anything, or whether that is just a horrific scene, but it doesn't necessarily tell you anything in an investigative sense.
No, I mean, as my colleague just mentioned, we don't know enough. Did they have an engine failure? Maintaining a heading in low visibility and heavy could become a problem, and the airplane would fly an arc, not because they wanted to, but didn't have complete control. But from my perspective, take everything I say as absolute speculation because I really have no data to underline what I'm thinking and saying.
Well, let me, and we totally appreciate that. And I'm going to ask Jeff, and I'm going to let you go, Randy, because I know you have to prepare for the next show. But I do want to ask you, Jeff, the same thing, because all we can see right now is the horror, obviously, the flames, the smoke. You can see that we're near the mall. You can see a Ross shopping center, a Ross store right near the sign for it. So you see how residential it is. You can see the apartment buildings. And we only have that and the actual physical attitude of the aircraft that you can see really barreling into the ground. And I'm wondering if that arc, seeing it, knowing this plane had only recently taken off, if that alone, Jeff, tells you anything from an investigative point of view.
Yes, it does. It opens up several possibilities. The airplane is obviously not in control, right? It does not appear to be attempting to land because it's moving much too fast, and it's coming down at a very steep angle. So it's telling me that the aircraft there's a loss of control there. The airplane may actually even be aerodynamically stalled, where there's no lift being generated off the wings, so it's more falling than it is flying. But it could just be spatial disorientation, where the pilot doesn't know which side's up. It could be a flight control malfunction. It could be a catastrophic engine failure that causes flight control damage or the startle effect with the pilots. This happened after takeoff, so things are very dynamic during that time. It just depends. But you can be sure that video will provide meaningful data to the investigators.
I want to thank each of those of you who came on and did all of this extra duty for us. Ali Velshi, Randy Babbitt, Jeff Gazzetti on this night of breaking news when a second catastrophic plane crash in the United States near Philadelphia. And thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Inside with Jen Psaki, which starts right now.